Well, Shabbat Shalom to all our family and friends. What a awesome time it is to be alive, and we are so grateful to Abba that He has given us mercy. He has shown us grace, love, and forgiveness, and given us this opportunity to live out our roles in the earth. This is Torah Talk with Tony and Bill. I'm Tony. This is Bill. I call him Papa B. We're going to jump right into this. We want to ask that you continue to pray for our country and those who are affected by the decisions we make in this country. We understand our responsibility as the free world to model to others what freedom is and what it should look like in our practical everyday living. We love what we do here. Papa B and I have such a good time talking about the word and just, releasing to you what we feel the Lord is saying to us. We thoroughly enjoy that. We invite you to come out to Biblical Lifestyle Center. It's a place where we're all growing and developing. Our focus is to live this biblical lifestyle just the way that He's given it to us. And so we don't claim to be perfect, or we don't claim to be without flaws. We just love Abba, and we trust Him, and we believe in what He's doing in our lives. We've been talking about this global ecclesiastical circumcision, this mass circumcision that we believe is going on in the earth right now on purpose. When we look at some of the things that are going on in our country, in our culture, and around the world, we understand how important it is for the people of God to step into their roles and begin to live this kingdom lifestyle before those that are going to be influenced by what they see. One of the things that I remember us talking about, Papa B, and then we'll move into this here in a little bit, in one of our Parsha studies, is the deliverance of the people of Israel from Egypt. And one of the things that you pointed out, and maybe you want to talk about that a little bit now, is that this deliverance didn't just affect Israel, right? Israel was the focus point of the deliverance, but there were other people too that would be impacted by this deliverance. And so it was so when we look at sometimes the plagues and things that were brought onto that culture, sometimes we get in that mode where we're cheering that on because we feel like these are people that deserve punishment, blah, blah, blah. And we forget that the Lord was drawing these people out. He was not just coming in to beat up on a nation of people. He was drawing a people to Himself. And so Israel would not be the only individuals to see God's glory, to see His ability and His power and be influenced by that move. Can you talk a little bit about that? We talked about it.
Yeah, everything that the Creator does is creative. He is not trying to inflict pain. He is not here to cause harm. And so when we see these stories developing, and He wrote these stories with this unique ability of a great writer, a great script writer, a great story. These are all true stories that He actually choreographed, but that He has caused to be recorded in the Bible, in the Torah particularly that we're looking at now, in such a way as to awaken and inspire our hearts and the hearts of all that will read them, generation after generation after generation. So it's good news to understand this is a story that He's telling that is designed to awaken a people to arise at such a time as we live in, whatever it may be, and change their world. Now, with that being said, let's look at the context of the portion of the story we're looking at. With God, the Creator of the universe, is dealing with His creations. Every one of these people that is involved. Pharaoh is a creation of God, and he does not hate his creations. Similarly, there are the magicians, the court jesters, so to speak, as we may think of them. We think of them in negative terms. These are just human beings as well. They have surrendered their hearts and their wills to the occult. They have gotten caught up in what they would have called New Age. uh, and we might call New Age. They are manipulators. They are people who the end justifies the mean in their minds. This is people. This is folks, and this is especially people who have some level of influence in the world. These are our politicians, and these are our statesmen, and these are our elected officials, and our influential, wealthy people. These are just people, okay? And all of God's stories are about real people. And the thing about it is, in one level, he's dealing with the Pharaoh, and he's not dealing with him because he hates him. He's also dealing with the people who are under Pharaoh's thumb, and I'm not just talking about the Israelites. I'm talking about the Egyptians. And I'm talking about the magicians. And I'm talking about the perverse people who were living in that realm, and the people of all nations who had been drawn into Egypt as part of the grand redemptive plan when Joseph was in charge and the 7 years of famine took place, and the nations of the world and the peoples of the world, every ethnic group in the world came to Egypt because that was the place where there was food, there was money. You've seen it happen in our days. There's a city or a region that becomes a boom area. Sometimes it's related to oil. Back in the California days in the 40s, of the 1840s, it was gold. You know, it may be food. It may be technology, Simi Valley in California. Now kind of a movement into Texas again for various different reasons. You see population shifts that flow from time to time when there's a great transfer of wealth or information or some other economic benefit. So this is what happened. And so the Father, the Holy One, as he's looking into this story, as he's writing this story, choreographing it, he's not out there saying, I just want to crush old Pharaoh and show how powerful I am. He is not only going to offer Pharaoh many opportunities individually, personally, to get to know him, because that was the first thing Pharaoh said. I don't know that God, and I will not do what he says. Well, you know, that you could look at that as a challenge, but God's not like a man who gets challenged by that. He didn't have an ego issue to deal with. He's not saying, oh, he doesn't appreciate me. He doesn't respect me. That's not God's idea. He's like, Pharaoh, this is your problem, not mine. So how am I going to give you opportunities up to a stage? There's a line at which you can cross. And that line of cross is not my and your line. It's the line of the damage you're causing to the people. Once you have reached a level of causing significant damage that is irreversible, if I don't stop it, you will cross that line. And so it is with all people and all situations in our world. Now, if we understand that this beautiful, glorious creator is working with Pharaoh, he's working with these magicians, and he is working not just with them individually as on an individual collective basis, he's dealing with everyone who is under their influence. Everyone who is affected by their words and their thoughts. Everyone is affected by their actions, by their behaviors. This is big stuff. This is what kind of stuff God does. This is God's stuff. When he says, okay, I don't have just one thing to deal with. I have everything to deal with. I have the future of mankind and the future of creation to deal with. Therefore, I must behave responsibly. Therefore, I must do things that are necessary, sometimes unpleasant, but I also must do things that will inspire and encourage a people to arise that will be able to go beyond, further than they've ever been before, to bring the redemptive plan, the restorative plan of God for his creation, for his individual humanity, and his collective to be able to be in fruition. So this deliverance, if we understand that, I'm not supposed to use that phraseology, but I'm going to get over that. The reality that I can see here is that the Hebrew word that we translate as deliverance is ga'al. There's not Saul, but not Saul is to draw. It is not so much the physical action of what he does to break you free. It's what he does in your heart. So the first part of deliverance that we talk about in this process is what he's doing, not necessarily on the surface, in the externals, even the what he did to the river, or what he did to the land to cause it to turn into lice, or what he did to the heavens to cause it to pour forth ice and hail and fire. It's not necessarily just the physical action. It's what he's doing in the hearts of the people. He's drawing them. Draw me after you, and we will run, in the Song of Solomon. And this whole issue of the not solving, the drawing of man's heart to his creator. So that is item 1 of deliverance. Item 2 is Gaal, and that Gaal Hebrew verb means is a kinsman redemption, because we have a mark of kinsmanship, because we have shared goals and identities by virtue of our family relationship, the relationship we have developed with one another or been born into. I will do whatever is necessary. I will step in and do whatever is required and essential in order to cause you to be able to fulfill your purpose. Now, that Gaal aspect of things, 2 things involved. 1, the mark of family, the mark of the relationship, the mark of the king, so to speak. We are in the king's household, and the mark of the king will have many connotations to it as far as how it lays out, kind of like if you break down the spectrum of light, it turns into 7 colors of the rainbow and all those little hues in between. That's the way the mark of the creator, the king, is upon his people. It has these various different elements, but some of them are very prominent. And one of them, obviously, is the Shabbat, the fear of the Lord, and the Shabbat, the Sabbath, the learning how to stop, to break away from the mind that says, I have to do, I have to do, I have to do. I have to force, I have to force, I have to accomplish, I have to accomplish, I have to accomplish. It says, I can just enjoy my creator and his creation, and I can delight in him and this beautiful garden that he has given to me. That's the Sabbath aspect of things. The fear of the Lord, again, we're not talking about terrified, shaking in your boots fear. We're talking about trembling, but the trembling is joyful trembling, because how wonderful and how glorious and how beautiful he is. So he builds that in us. So part of this idea of his making the mark for the Gaal is to cause this reverence, this delight, this joy, this thrill, this exuberance to arise in us. Altogether lovely are you, he says to us. And all we want to yell back, you are fairest among 10,000. And we want to declare back, our tongue is filled with as a pen of a ready writer, ready to write the noble theme, and he stirs this process in us. This is the mark that he puts upon us, and that mark that he begins to build into and pour into and feed into and do whatever is necessary to bring that person, even if that person has got a lot of problems and a lot of issues. Because, you see, it's the mark, it's not the person's behavior. It's the mark on them that he reaches in to deliver. That he says, that is my potential that I'll work with. I'll take this raw material and I can make that beautiful for the sake of my creation. Now, this issue of deliverance is what he's always about. This mass global ecclesiastical circumcision is designed in order to bring forth the natsal, the drawing of us to him, and therefore we're not feeling oppressed because our flesh is being cut away. We are excited and joyful that we are finally being set free from oversensitivity, over-sentimentality, over-sensuality, over-susceptibility to stuff. And we're instead able to be our Creator's creation, the way he designed it. So there's that aspect of the natsaling, the being drawn. And he is always engaged in doing it even now. This mass ecclesiastical circumcision, or cutting away of the flesh of his people that we're talking about, is a big part of bringing forth that deliverance in this day, in our age.
Deliverance is such a significant part of our journey, of course. When I look at the people of Israel, I'm looking at their cry, right? Hearing their cry out. And they're crying out of this place, out of this experience. And Abba comes, he hears the cry, he remembers his covenant, he hears the cry, and he responds, right? And he does that with us too. He hears our cry, even those cries that others cannot hear, because maybe it's not something that's vocal, maybe it's not a verbal cry or anything like that, but he hears the deep cry, right? He hears he hears the limitations and what those limitations are doing to us, right? And how they are preventing and restricting us from being who he's created us to be. And so sometimes we cry out of those places, even though we don't truly understand what it is that he's doing when he responds to that cry, right? So they start coming out because, he gets involved. But then there is this anxiety and this fear that comes as he's moving them through this process. So, the proclamation goes out. Moshe is told to go and tell Pharaoh these things. And so the proclamation starts. And once the proclamation of salvation is released, then comes more hardship, right? More resistance. And and I think sometimes we think this way, when we hear the proclamation, there's such joy and energy around that proclamation that we initially think, yay, and we're ready and we're excited. And then the process starts. The resistance comes and a little bit of anxiety creeps in, and we start getting distracted by what we're experiencing at that moment. That's why I like the fact that this circumcision is nestled between the two parshas, right? We first see it in Bereshit, where right there after Lech Lecha, between Lech Lecha and Vayira, we see the circumcision taking place. He calls us, right? He calls us into this place. He calls us into this meeting type experience. It's time for you to go now, and for yourselves, go out. It's time to discover who you are, right? He's encouraging them to really get invested in this process of knowing who you are, because that's important. He's going to tell you who you are, and that's important. And that leads us into that circumcision experience, because as we begin to know who we are, there is a level of readiness there where we're ready to surrender to that identity, and then the circumcision hits, and we're ready now for the experience of experiencing him. I remember you talking about, I don't know if we have time for you to go over the whole dream, but I remember you talking about years ago this experience that you had where the Lord allowed you to be in his chambers, right? And you're sitting there and you're listening, and there all this. I thought about this when you was talking a little bit ago, because in the corporate world you have executive leadership, right? And the executive board doesn't always allow you to come in, right? They're going to make some high level decisions, and it's not always a good thing to have people there that are lower level, right? And so they're making these high level decisions, and they're going to affect the entire company. Some people may lose their jobs based on what decisions are being made, but there are times, and I remember this because I'm going over the story that you told us and the experience you had. I remember when I first started working at this particular company, there was a board that didn't allow people of my position in those meetings, and they had reasons for that. Those very private meetings, and they were executive level, and so they didn't allow people. And so when I took on the position, I was allowed to come into that meeting, and my CEO is at this meeting, and all these executive physicians that are at this meeting, and I'm sitting. I didn't want to sit at the table with them, right? Because I didn't want to appear as if I belong here. So I sit in the back area, and I'm listening, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know. This knowledge is so beyond me. This experience is so beyond me. But at the same time that I felt ignorant to that information, I also felt humbled, and I felt grateful because I was there and I understood the significance of that meeting. And I remember you talking about when you were brought into this place, chamber room type of experience, and this is a very beautiful place. There's some high level stuff going on. You don't even know whether or not you need to be there, but you're there, right? I want you to talk about that a little bit, because the reason I'm doing this is because as we're moving into this place of global ecclesiastical circumcision. I also think of a dream that came from Marcy about the Ark of the Covenant being let down. As we experience this, there's such beauty around us, right? We're exposed to such high level things that there is a humility that will set on us, because in some ways we're going to feel out of place, right? Do we actually belong within this process? So I wanted you to talk a little bit about you.
The experience, and again, the timing. I could talk about this experience, many others, but it's mostly about what God wants to do in it. So I'm gonna get to the, yes, I was asking God where he stays and what he does, what Yeshua does now. And in the dream that night, after that dream, after I had this prayer time before I went to bed, I was crying out. I just want to know, what do you do? I mean, I know you. I know who you are. I've read your stories. I've walked with you. I've been through the Jesus movement. I mean, hey, look, I've had day-to-day conversations with you, but I've never really asked you what you do and where you are at this moment and in your fullness of your personality, of your activities. And so we drawn into the heavenly realms, and into the heavenly realms at night. And I go and I'm there, and I open this door. It's like an elevator comes out of earth and goes into this heavenly chamber. And I'm there, and I'm like I'm lost. I don't know where I am. I've not, I think of myself as praying in the courts of the King, but then when you're actually in some level of realm, even in your dreams, where it's real, it's tangible to you, as opposed to just a vision, it begins to stir your heart, and you feel like you belong here in some way, but in other ways you're just lost as a goose. And so I'm looking around, and somebody says, "I think they want you over here." And it's like an angelic being who's saying, "I think they want you in this room right here." And so I go into the room, and I'm immediately impressed by the glory and nobility that's on everybody in the room. There's like a big table. I'd call it like, I guess we'd call it in the legal world a war room, a strategy room, where you plan strategies and you have the different counselors to give your input and so it's like that. And these people are all just the noble, glorious. I don't know if they were men of different ages or angels or what they were, but they had this nobility and this glory upon them. And then at the end, closer to what they had a board. It's like a whiteboard, but it was multi-dimensional. And when you look through this board, you could see not just one generation, but not just one moment, but generation. Not just one generation, but two generations. Not just two generations, but all generations. So every action, every concept, everything they were doing, every strategy that they had to deal not just with the moment and the immediate circumstance, but all circumstances that would ever exist and all the bloodline issues that would come out of this one. What if you touch one person in one generation, you touch 45 million people over the course of all the generations. So that's why when we talk about, they start talking and you're just like, it's way over my head. I can't even think in terms that you're talking about. So I'm there, and in the process of being there, I'm just stunned at the beauty and the glory of these people who are around this table and around this board. And then there is him and Yeshua, who I'd asked to see what he's doing and where he is there. And he eclipses all of them. I mean, in beauty and in majesty, and just emanates this warmth of love and joy and peace. He's not upset. He's not angry. At least the image, I don't see him in any way worried or frustrated or anxious about any of the things that are going on the earth or any of the problems and the wars and the climate. He's not worried about them. He feels, and so he smiles. He sees me across the room in this vision, in this dream, and I'm almost embarrassed that I'm there. I look like, I want to say, wrong room, and all of a sudden a big smile breaks across his face, and he leaves what he's doing. He leaves all those counselors and advisors and that whiteboard that he's got, and he runs across the room and grabs me in a bear hug, nose to nose, eye to eye. I'm feeling his breath, and I'm feeling his heart beating against my heart as he's just holding me up. And he's shaking his head like this and kind of chuckling. He says, "Bill, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you came." And he says, it turns, everybody says, friend, this is Bill. He's the one I've been talking about. He's the one I've been discussing. And it's like, I'm thinking, oh, I can't believe that he feels that way about me. I can't believe that he sees any potential in me at all. I feel like I'm totally out of my world, and I am. And he says, Bill, come join us. I want you to meet. And he has me meet some of these people and these beings or whatever they are. And he begins to say, okay, here's what we're talking about. And he begins to show me on the whiteboard and the levels and the different things. And they're beginning to give their input and their comments to it. And they're wise, they're brilliant about how this is going to affect the next generation and the next generation. And I'm thinking, and he turns to me at some stage and he looks at me and he says, Bill, what do you think? And my mind is just totally blown. And I say, I don't even know how to address what you're talking about. I thought I was intelligent on earth. I thought I knew stuff. I had opinions about stuff. I had beliefs about stuff. I'm listening to who you're doing and who you are and what is going on, these things that are being said and done and the way in which you have to approach things. And can I just sit here and listen? I don't have an opinion. I don't have any input. And I realized you didn't bring me here for that, did you? He says, no, that would be just fine, Bill. And he smiles and twinkles his eye like, now you kind of figured out. I love you, and I want you to be able to participate in some of my discussions, but you don't really know what you're talking about. You know, you think you do, and you've been talking on earth like you do, and but you kind of need to understand this is high level stuff. This is God stuff. And if you want to do the God stuff, you need to learn to listen for a while. So I guess in this context of learning how to interpret his prophetic words, we're talking specifically about right now the mass circumcision, global ecclesiastical mass circumcision word. We're also talking about the stories of the Torah, and these two must interrelate. These are two of the revelation streams. These are two of the lasers that he uses, his scalpels that he uses out of the four, two of the four, that he will use to circumcise and cut away the excess flesh. When we interpret these things, we understand this is powerful God stuff. This is not in human intellect. This is not man's wisdom. This is not man's opinions or ideas. This is not a bunch of religious doctrines. We're talking about God, the creator of the universe and the creator of humanity, doing marvelous things to bring humanity back to the purpose for which he was created and to bring creation back to the marvelous state in which it was designed to function harmoniously, beautifully, fruitfully.
We're at a point to where we're going to close, but there's so much we want to talk to you about within this particular vein. We want to, when we come back, we want to talk more about the fact that this circumcision is nestled between the two parshas. I wanted probably to talk about that experience because it's such a beautiful experience, but it talks to us about there's such a bigger picture going on. I mean, and sometimes we can fall into this place to where we're looking at what's going on right now in our world, and we can lose sight that there's a bigger picture. He's doing something greater than even what we can comprehend. But because we cooperate with him and because we walk with him, we're able to go ahead and participate in those things. And so I want you to continue to stay with us as we walk through this process. There's such beauty and glory that's going to come forth out of this. Listen, don't forget to pray for our country and those who are affected by the decisions we make in this country. We understand that there are many individuals out there that are now starting to become a part of this process because you're actually beginning to understand what circumcision is, which was the reason that we wanted to start talking about this. It's not that we weren't saying that you're not experiencing circumcision. We wanted those who are experiencing circumcision to be able to recognize that so that there be more of a cooperation taking place. When I look at the two parshas, Abba was up to something the whole time. And sometimes we're so busy going through the motions of what we're dealing with that we forget he's up to something. And I'm telling you, I sense that Abba is up to something. I'm not even, there was a time where if I'd have turned on the news probably
Oh, yeah.
and listened to some of the stuff that I'm hearing right now, my heart would have been, I would have been anxious, and I got all these questions, and I'm trying to dig in as well, and I'm trying to give my view of it. I can turn on the television now and the news can flash and they can talk about whatever they're talking about and the challenges and problems that they'll bring. And I am so locked in to what Abba is saying right now. I'm so under those scalpels and those revelation streams to where I'm not moved by that stuff. I'm focused. I know that stuff exists. I know there's other stuff behind the stuff behind the stuff, but that's not what I'm moved by. I'm actually captivated at this point over the beauty of the words and his ability to narrate these stories for us and navigate us through life. When last week when you were talking and we were going over, it just appealed to me. It just took my heart when we started reading the I wills. And I saw, my heart started melting when I saw him giving those promises, saying to us, I will do these things, right? I will bring you to myself. I was like, oh God, I'll bring you out of it. I'll give you an inheritance. I'll take you into all those things. Just really sat with me because I literally for the first time saw him that way. And I felt myself on the other end of that conversation and him saying, I will. I remember when I was getting married, and that's, the preacher would say, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded? And I had to say, I do. Now, we rehearsed that, right? We rehearsed it before. He says, look, I'm going to say these things, and you're going to say I do. I'm going to say this, and you'll say I will. Then you'll take her hand, and you'll put the ring on all this. And so we rehearsed all that. I always look at the Moedim as rehearsals, right? We are preparing. We're getting the script. He's telling us everything he wants us to do and say, and how he wants us to interact and react, or to respond to him. And when I saw that passage of scripture, I was immediately drawn to that. I will free you from. I will take you as mine. I will bring you into. I will give it to you as your inheritance. I will. And then he backs it up with these 7 signs or these 7 testimonies. If you've heard him say, I will, and then you watch him go on the stage and perform that way.
Yeah, it's, what we're talking about is a form of, and I call it divine courtship. I don't want to get too deep into that aspect of things. Other than this, a courtship, as opposed to a dating relationship or a chance encounter, or we have to run into the grocery store or some other place and you get kind of attracted. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about a strategically choreographed plan to determine if someone is ready to make a commitment to a long-term co-laboring, in this case, co-regency, co-ruling realm of relationship. And that process involves time and strategically choreographed interactions. That's what we call them Moedim, which is what the Hebrew calls them. But in English, you see festivals or feasts, the things that are referenced, particularly in Leviticus chapter 23, later in Deuteronomy, they're referred to again all through the Gospels. Yeshua is always engaged in these festivals, in these Moedim. And the reason is because they are the choreographed interactions of the one who is being courted, the ones who are being courted with their Creator. These are not parties we have. And meetings where men get together and clergy do services, or singers sing songs trying to impress everybody, release their latest CD. This is not religion. This is relationship building 101. And that's the reason these Moedim, these festivals, the Passover, the unleavened bread, the day of first fruits, the 50 days of counting to get to the Sefirat HaOmer, we call it, then the day of Shavuot or Pentecost, and then later in the year, the day of trumpets, of then the 10 days of awe. I've kind of moved right by Elul in the period of Teshuvah, which is a big deal. But all these different seasons of time are designed to be strategic calls for us to enter into betrothal, courtship level relationship, to determine in our hearts whether we're ready to commit to him and his plan and his redemptive ways upon the earth, or whether we're still selfish, tied up, or caught up, or in love with somebody else, some other way, some other plan. The issue of the cry, you mentioned earlier about the cry, that the Holy One responded in the story of Exodus to the cry of his people. What we don't often see is looking at the timing and the circumstances that brought forth the cry. But you see, the Holy One could have brought them out of Egypt anytime he wanted to. It wouldn't have solved the problem, and it wouldn't have taken care of the ultimate issue. The ultimate issue that he had to deal with was winning this people to his heart and preparing them to get out. And so what we have is all the time that the Pharaoh was ordering that the babies be thrown in the Nile, or ordered that the male babies were being killed on the birthing stool, they never made the outcry. They coped, and they had the sense that somehow things were going to get better. All they knew was Egypt. All this people understood who was Egypt and his ways, and even if it wasn't good, even if it was dangerous, even if it was even problematic. I mean, you lived in Chicago. You lived on the south side of Chicago. Every day, you had violence around you. I mean, I remember driving on the L, going through there, and thinking, "My goodness, how do you live here?" And then because of what happened on the train. and so this process, but they never cried out. The only time they cried out, when he cried, is when Pharaoh died. Because at that particular sense, they had no one to connect with. They had nothing, even the darkness, the bad guy, that they didn't really trust or like. He was something. He was a leader. He gave them some sense that somebody was doing something. And he died, and suddenly there was nothing to hold on to. They felt like they needed something, and finally they cried out to God. Persecution couldn't make them do it. Hate couldn't make them do it. They just got angry. They just got defensive. They just came up with plans to strategize around it. But whenever they lost their connection to a sense that somebody was at least doing something and that they really didn't belong here, then they cried out. Now it says, now you're ready for courtship. Now you're ready for courtship. It's kind of like whenever I said to him, I don't even know where you are. I know who you are, but I don't know what you're doing really in real time. And that's why he said, okay, it's a cry. So he responded to that cry by the dream with taking me up into this realm. And it's how he bursts the cry. And then he responds to the cry. And then from that point forward, it's how far you want to go. If you want to take an exit ramp and quit, he'll give you a few chances to do that. If you want to abort the circumcision, he'll give you a couple of abortion passes on the circumcision. But he is designed to keep calling you forth, to call you to cry out to him again. It's not a cry out of pain. It's a cry out of desperation. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. We don't know who we are anymore. And that cry he always responds to.
Wow. We don't know who we are anymore. So I'm saying to you that's listening, this is so good today. There's so much more that we have to share with you. And as the Lord gives it to us, we'll share it. We want to be patient with him because we want to release to you what you'll need to take courage in this hour and continue to walk in harmony with the call and the wisdom of Yeshua. Listen, we love you, and we want to see Abba's hand on your life, bringing you through this process of circumcision, because we know that there is a greater story, there is a greater picture, and you and I are all involved in that picture. We invite you to come out to our Sabbath meeting this morning and be a part of this Shabbat meeting. There's so much that comes out of this. We really feel the love of Abba. We sense the blessedness, the holiness, and the rest as we come out and we enjoy Abba's word. Don't forget, pray for our country and those who are affected by the decisions we make in this country. Until next week, Shabbat Shalom.